Jackson. How are you doing today?
Doing well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Josh.
I know it's been a long day. I assume a stressful day, but you look like it's not that stressful.
I think I had a pretty good time. We had a good time in part because of how receptive your faculty and staff are. And then we had visitors from outside, even from other states. And everyone seemed to be having a truly good time. And by that I mean they were serious about our subject matter. They really wanted to dig into the texts that we had chosen. And the talks, the lectures were, I think, edifying. So I think it was a good day on the whole.
Fantastic. Well, it really has been a great day, and it's, especially if you can say that at 4:15 in the afternoon after a full day conference. That's right. That's a great sign.
And we started at 8, so
we did.
Still going.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of What's the Res? Here at What's the Res, we are always looking to be contributing to the ongoing conversation about the current resolutions in the world of high school debate. My name is Josh Herring. I'm a debate coach and humanities instructor at Thaley's Academy in Rollsville, North Carolina. Today, my guest is Dr. Robert Jackson. Dr. Jackson, you'll have to forgive me. I may need your help with getting the credentials correct, but because I did not do my homework and look this up earlier. But my understanding is that you are the Director of Academics for Great Hearts Academy and also the Director of the Institute for Classical Education.
So the moniker is formerly the Chief Academic Officer.
Thank you.
And then you had it right on the second score, Director of the Institute for Classical Education. That's
excellent,
right. Yep.
Excellent. Well, I'm so glad that you and the other two gentlemen were able to be here with us today. It's been a wonderful day of discussing literature and looking at the application that has to everything else we do in the school world. And I was telling one of my colleagues earlier today, it felt like we're in English major heaven today.
I think that's right.
Well, I thought about this episode in part because I was looking ahead at some of the potential Lincoln-Douglas debate resolutions coming up, and there's one that is on the slate for 2019-2020. No, we don't know for sure if that one will be picked because they do more than the 6 that they do throughout the year, but it focuses on charter schools. And I know that's an area of expertise for you, so I was hoping you could lend us some of your expertise about charter schools.
Okay,
today.
Happy to. What do you want me to start?
Well, let's start with, I'm assuming that some of the people who would listen to this episode are doing so not because they want to know about a lesser arm of American education, but because they have to research it for a debate. So let's start where all good debates start with definitions. Okay. What exactly is a charter school?
Charter school is a public school that has been authorized by the state, which of course is where education is governed formally, per the 10th Amendment. This being the duty of the state to provide for the education of its citizens, the charter law makes space for an entity to step forward and effectively take on a contract with the state. That is, we will offer education to students. This is a charter operator.
Okay.
We will offer education, formal education, K-12 education, to students using the following model with these parameters so as to achieve these outcomes which the state agrees are desirable. So it is a function of the state to then agree first to the contract terms and then to dispense, based on the fulfillment of those terms, per pupil funding to that school for each of the students that is enrolled. So effectively, just to boil it down, it's a contract between an entity that is taking on the responsibility of a public school, to operate as a public school at the state, with an agreement with the state, and then will be held accountable for whatever outcomes that state has for its other district schools. So we think of public schools chiefly as the ones down the street that are under the district model. The charter model is simply an arrangement that works in a variety of ways. So this is where it gets complicated. It can be a direct charter from the state. It can be a charter authorizer who is working as a district. And a local district can determine that they want to offer a charter model, right? To partner and contract with someone.
Okay.
Or you can have a county step forward. We see this a lot in Colorado as an example, where a county will step forward and say, we will be the charter authorizer. So the state will determine what regulatory entity, essentially what executive entity is going to oversee the charters, will come into this contract with that entity to provide public education to the students of that locale.
So it really does vary in a lot of
does.
different, it sounds like it would be, I mean, so I know here in North Carolina, we have an increasing number of charters in recent years. My school's founder, Bob Luddy, also started Franklin Academy as a public charter school here in Wake Forest. But when he went back for a second charter, because they had maxed out Franklin's size per the charter, the state was not giving out any more such arrangements. But more recently, they've opened those up, and seems like there's a Youngsville charter, and there's charter schools there's Rollsville charter right down the street. They're everywhere.
So what you're seeing there, Josh, is the politics of education. Now that's stating a truism, but I find it fascinating that charter laws, the very first charter laws in these United States, began in the mid-90s. I want to say 94. Minnesota was the first state. So anybody listening to this, make sure you do your homework. I just don't have my Wikipedia ready or at hand. 94.
It's okay. Debaters are good at that.
Okay,
sort of
94
detail.
or so, mid-90s, when the first charters were, and I do know it was Minnesota. Shortly after that, California, Arizona, maybe 96. So there was this emergence of the model of states that could adopt charter legislation. So it's a law that permits this arrangement that I'm describing to you. And it's really, it's 25 years old. That's about all there is to it.
That's not that old
It's
in terms
not
of
at all.
educational traditions.
Not at all, not at all. If we think back to the emergence of high schools and districts, which numbered in the tens of thousands back at the turn of the 20th century, as the 20th century was unfolding, you really had this explosion in the teens and 20s of districts across the country. And so when we look at charter laws and charter schools, that's a relatively recent phenomena. District schools, the typical district school is the dominant model, and in that sense has served as the status quo, to use a term that might come up in forensics.
Yep.
The status quo for public education.
Now, just since you dropped that term, and that's usually something that people, only those who are sort of in the know about the forensics world drop correctly. So what is your knowledge of or background with forensics?
No, I have very little, except the debate team at my former institutional home, the King's College in New York City, served as their faculty supporter promoter. Was
wonderful.
Not,
so you're a friend of the debate
world.
world.
I'm definitely a friend of the debate world. One of my best students, in fact, went on to teach in a classical school, the classical schools with which I'm affiliated, the Great Hearts Academies, and is still there. So I have a tie to the world of debate. Never, sadly, unfortunately, never experienced it as a high school student. I wish, if I could go back, if I could roll back the tape, I'd jump in both feet.
It's really been wonderful to watch. I didn't have it in high school either. We had a single speech and debate class that Mr. Woods taught, and he managed to work in. There were so many dirty joke tongue twisters that
geez.
he insisted that we had to try, and we were in trouble if we mispronounced any of them. But it was great training. But that was really the extent of that. But I got into this in college, and but I've loved watching the effects of debate on my high schoolers, because invariably it speeds up their thinking. They become so quick at writing, and they know that research doesn't just mean you read the first 3 articles that Google turns up. You have to get deeper.
You have to dig in.
That.
You have to dig in. That's right.
Now, since you mentioned King's College, I don't suppose you know a guy named Paul Mueller in their economics department.
I do, but Paul joined the faculty after I had left.
I think so.
Yeah.
He was a couple years ahead of me at Hillsdale College,
Okay.
but we reconnected at the Acton Institute conference a few years ago.
Yep.
He's acquired a beautiful bushy beard, and I think he's on the road to tenure with King's, if I remember correctly.
Fantastic. Good to
Anyway,
hear.
let's get back to charter schools. Now, part of the resolution that I'm thinking of, this would be particularly pertinent to, it's a negative one in the sense that the resolution reads something like charter schools harm public education. So, and I've heard that my grandfather was in public education for his entire career. He was a teacher and then a principal, and eventually he moved into textbook sales with Glencoe Macmillan. And when I once mentioned to him that Franklin is a charter school, he didn't even listen to the fact that I don't teach there. He just launched into a narrative about how charter schools clearly harm public education because they steal funding. Now, I was curious if you could make a response to that, because I'm sure you've heard such arguments before.
I have, and my first impulse is to want to define the harm, right? What harm would be done? We find that charter schools first came to light, or first came into existence in part, largely led by a coalition of public school teachers, so district school teachers. I'm going to forget the name here, so I apologize. I should know this history like the back of my hand.
That's
but,
okay.
But there was a union leader of the American Federation of Teachers who stepped up, I think very courageously, to provide support for and believe that charters would make possible an alternative to the district structure that had basically created a stranglehold, especially on very large districts where there was little mobility or opportunity for students, especially students in the most depressed neighborhoods. And so, this coalition of public school educators and administrators and even union leaders stepped forward to say, we support this. In fact, it was their brainchild. You could turn back, if you wanted to roll the clock back and discuss something like Milton Friedman's proposal. Yes, that's there in the 70s, right? That he thought there was advantage to allowing the open market to determine the quality of schools, allowing parents to vote with their feet, right? And to see dollars, that is to say state monies, follow students and allow families to make choices, right? That was an early proposal, but that never became a policy nor a law. That was a brainchild. That was an idea.
Sure.
And really an idea that we would associate more with vouchers, right? With sort of a direct, here's your money,
okay.
take it where you'll go, be it public, private, or at home for that matter, as we now look at homeschooling. But what I want to point to is the fact that the originators of charter education, the charter law in Minnesota, were determined that this was the best or most effective way to sort of break up the gridlock, right? To sort of to make more opportunities available to the students who needed it most. And I would add, of the nearly 7,000 charter schools that dot this land, the vast majority, I would say probably 90%, are focused around a mission or missions that aim to serve the underserved.
Interesting.
So I think the spirit of the first charter laws and the spirit of the continued growth and expansion of charter legislation, which now touches most of the 50 states, is really driven by a desire, an impulse to care and to serve the underserved.
So it really sounds like the charter school movement is in part a response to an existing lack of ability of these larger districts to really effectively serve sections of their communities that honestly may not have existed when that district model was first developed. Is that a fair read?
No, that's right. And so I wanted to come back around to the notion of harm, right? Because if we're talking about benefit and or who it is that schools, public schools, are designed to serve, the real harm that we need to look at first at the origin of charter schools, the origination of charter schools, is the harm that was perceived by public school teachers occurring with students who could not help themselves. But I don't mean to dodge the question. I just want to set that as our context or backdrop.
Okay.
And then suggest that as these charter schools continue, as I said, to seek out and serve populations of usually the typical metric of how large a population of students, really needy students, is what's called FRL, free and reduced lunch. That's often a kind of a metric by which we'll say, well, there's 80% of the population is free and reduced lunch. That's clearly the socioeconomic demographics represent a significantly poor population. I would say, as I said a moment ago, probably 90% of these schools are really looking to serve 70 or 80 or more percent of an FRL population. So, but to your question, again, not to dodge it, your question about do they harm schools, district schools, I would say charter schools are producing an opportunity for families to choose. Families in a given district, as it's zoned in a particular community, can in fact choose their district school. They will have to make a choice. They will have to go through quite a process if they think that the charter school down the street or even across town, this is, again, depending on the state, but I think most charter laws permit families, if they can find the means, or if the school can somehow assist them, they can go to school in any part of, anywhere that they can get to, basically.
Okay.
All right, so they can go to charter school across town if they choose. They're going to have to go to great lengths both to seek out that school, to register. Most states are going to be based on a lottery system, so they'll have to stand in queue, as it were, not stand, but metaphorically,
Right.
get in queue, and then be selected by lottery and go through the registration process. But it's open to any student. And so I think to myself, if we're talking about harm being done because monies that would otherwise go to this district are going to that charter school, whether around the corner or across town, my question becomes, does the district school believe, I'm sort of turning your question with a question, right? Does the district school believe that it has the right and should be able to demand that families send their child to the local district school? Is that, in fact, a just rendering of our understanding of public K-12 education?
That's a very interesting response, because that kind of pushes the impetus of the question back on the other side to suggest that really it's the district school is in a sense tyrannizing what certainly seems self-evidently a natural choice or a natural ability of families to make a choice.
And families with means do make that choice, right? This we have seen sociologically, demographically, that when families who have the means decide that it's time to find a district that they believe to be suitable, that they believe will benefit their children, they will move. They will move to the neighborhood, to the district where they want their children to be enrolled in a school. And they, those with means, are able to do so. Those without the means are stuck. So when we say, or when the position is taken that charter schools are doing harm to district schools by siphoning off money, again, I am reorienting that question towards what is our end? What should be the end of K-12 public education and the dollars that support it? And I believe, as I'm sure you can surmise, that it should be to serve the families and the students, all of them, whether those families have means or not, but especially with an eye and a concern for those who do not have the means to simply relocate to the district of their choosing.
Well, it sounds like what you're describing is a relatively effective, and I'm sure there's a spectrum of success stories and less than successful charter schools. But it sounds like on balance what you're describing is really an effective public, private, local, state level partnership that really enables a greater amount of choice from parents who honestly, at least the parents I've met, are not necessarily interested in what is the good of the entire state. They're very concerned about the good of their children.
That's right, as they should be, as they should be. And I am describing that kind of nexus specifically between a kind of entrepreneurial spirit that comes from somewhere, in what we might call private life, but these are families whose private lives are then intersecting with public policy, namely the laws associated with public schooling, and for them to become involved in that process, that political process, exercising their vote and exercising their capacity to influence the lawmakers who are there to serve them, to provide, and when I say serve, I say so with this intent, to provide that public space, in this case public service, right, that is genuinely of benefit to them, not as a right. I think we need to be very careful with the rights language.
Sure.
We're very fortunate to have public education in these United States, and again, I think it's to be considered almost status quo, right, in the Western and the developed nations of the world. But I don't first think of it as a right. I think of it as a transmission of the values and, if I may, the tradition of those things that we believe are worth perpetuating. We're trying to pass along to the next generation the good things, the best ideas, the ways in which they can live, our children can live, because we want them to prosper. We want them to flourish. And so when I think of K-12 public education, I'm primarily concerned with its ends, namely to serve or to provide for those families an opportunity to think through and to choose wisely what will benefit their children in this transmission, right, of to the next generation of the values that we hold dear, right? And so you think back to our founding documents, specifically this notion that life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, how will I've got 5 children, we have 5 children, but how will my 8-year-old come to understand that? I will do my best, not only as a parent, the first educator, to convey the importance of this regime, our government, and how it's formed, but I'm actually trying to find a school that will work with me to reinforce our common understanding, hopefully our common understanding of what makes this regime so very beneficial to all of its citizens. That's the kind of parent, and I actually don't think I'm unique in this, and I don't hold myself to some, that I'm special. I think that most parents want better for their children, and they know that we have inherited the blessings, the prosperity of a very special place, namely these United States of America. I want to pass that along to my kids, and I want them to have the tools and the understanding to perpetuate it for my grandchildren, our grandchildren, right? I'm not trying to eliminate my wife from this conversation, and to their children, right? So that's how I view K-12 public education in these United States. I'm thinking towards the end. What is our end?
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate that. I remember it reminds me of, this is 8 years ago. My wife graduated from UNC Greensboro with her master's in library science, and the speaker at her graduation ceremony was he had been the previous superintendent of Wake County Public Schools for that was kind of his last stage in his career. And he was the first person I ever heard who made a very compelling case for public education. So I came out of the homeschooling days of the 90s and early 2000s, and then went to a brick and mortar private school for the end of high school, and then on to Hillsdale College from there. But and none of those places really made me terribly charitable towards public education. That just wasn't, those weren't the circles I ran in. But his argument was that essentially the things that education is truly all about, preparing people for their futures and giving them the basic tools that they need to thrive in a contemporary society, is really necessary for our whole polis to survive and to thrive. And that really is what it's why, and he said in his speech, one of the reasons that stuck out to me, he wasn't opposed to private education anyway. If people had the means to do that, he encouraged that. But he believed it was vital for our public education to educate citizens to the level that would equip them for success in the rest of their lives.
That's right.
And it changed my point of view on public education. Now, let me ask you one more question about public education. I want to shift this over to Great Hearts specifically.
Okay.
Now, as I was reading a little bit about charter schools, I kept running into this phrase, charter management companies. What exactly is a charter management company, and where does it fit into this discussion?
Yeah. So the charters that I mentioned earlier are the contract with the state. But that contract is between the state or the state authorizer and either the group of individuals, and there's always going to be like a governance structure, a board or otherwise that will be responsible to my knowledge of all the state law, and I don't know it all, but the state law requires that kind of board level oversight and governance of an entity, right, that is coming in to offer and provide the service. The charter management organization is a private entity that is simply stepping in and providing structure like the back office, the facilities, perhaps, the management of facilities, let's just refer to the back office. Anything that is needed to keep these schools operational and functional, the CMO, the Charter Management Organization, is the company that provides that, and thus is essentially a kind of a logistical support for what happens within the classroom, within the schoolhouse. In fact, they may own the schoolhouse, the facilities, right, and contract with teachers and or headmasters, but all of that is done, again, in the agreement of the charter contract such that it is this public, as you were saying earlier, this public-private kind of nexus.
Okay.
Right? To provide public education. It has to be understood that whatever the state requirements are for your typical right down the street district school, the same requirements will be applied to the charter school, again, with perhaps some rare exceptions. If their model being allowed, right, under this authorization, has some particular features. We're teaching Latin at the Great Hearts Academies, since we're going to talk about that in a moment. That's not a requirement, not even an offering in most of the most of the schools down the street from us. If we have different features, that's allowable as long as the basic rudiments. I think this was your friend's point. The basic rudiments of literacy and numeracy and probably citizenship, some basic civics understanding, would be required, and the state will have its end-of-year assessments at various intervals for various subject matter. All of that has to be met and or exceeded, we would hope, by the charter entity. Okay, so that's the organization, the CMO rather, is that larger body, which I'll just call or refer to as the sort of back office and support to help operate the schools.
So as students are looking at charter schools to kind of figure out where are they going well, where are they doing poorly, I assume it would be a wise endeavor then to also try to figure out, is there a charter management organization involved with this particular charter school that they're looking at? And that might also be another avenue to consider for strategy in terms of a debate.
Oh, that's right. I think that's right. You could look at CMOs, and there are many today. The big names in this world, in this sector rather, folks like KIP, which has actually regional entities that are state level.
It's KIP?
KIPP. Knowledge is Power Program, I think is what it originally stood for. Now everybody just calls it KIP.
Okay.
IDEA, the IDEA schools, the Imagine schools, the Great Hearts Academies that we'll talk about. So all of these are CMO operators, right, that are providing the structure and the infrastructure to support the activities of a given school, right? But again, they are contracting with the state to deliver that education for public dollars to these public school students.
Okay. Well, let's bring this around to Great Hearts Academy. I first became familiar with Great Hearts when two friends of mine at Hillsdale, I just respected their points of view very deeply, Jessica McCaleb and Parker Fox. Yeah. I'll have to let them know I give them a shout out on the show. But Jessica's now a nun of some sort, and Parker's become a lawyer.
I know Jessica. I don't know your other friend.
Yeah, Parker's now, I think he finished law school, and he's now practicing law and somewhere in the Phoenix area still. Okay. But they both came to Hillsdale from Phoenix, and I don't remember which of the Great Hearts Academies. So this is back in 2006, 2007.
Jessica taught at Veritas, and again, I don't know your friend, so I can't speak to where he was at. But
so they were both incredibly well read, and both had a very humane atmosphere that they kind of brought with them wherever they went. So and then my next exposure to Great Hearts was the teacher job fair at the end of my time at Hillsdale, and a lot of folks ended up signing on. Thomas and Brooke Rowe went with Great Hearts.
I know Tom Rowe. I know both of them.
Yep. And oh goodness. I'm blanking on several other names. But anyway, there were a bunch. So tell us about Great Hearts, and really particularly what is unique about Great Hearts?
Well, it is a charter management organization, but it began as a single chartered school, the Veritas Academy, the Veritas Preparatory Academy, I should say. Veritas Prep was founded in 2003 with 120 students in, if I get this wrong, the founding headmaster is going to kick me, I think 3 grades, 7, 8, 9. And then added a grade each year, right, until they had a complete prep school. The focus, or the distinctive that you're asking about, would be the great books. That is to say, books of long-standing respect, or from a tradition that acknowledges this is a master of the craft. And the craft could be literature, right? Could be something like the works of Homer. It could be philosophical. We read Plato and Aristotle. It could be dramatic, Shakespeare, right, or Milton, or the scientific endeavor, the mathematical arts, if you will. We cover the whole spectrum, right? So the distinctive quality, as I see it, would be reading great books 2 hours a day in what is known as humane letters, where students are seated around a table, actually a host of tables, because it must form kind of a rectangle or a square so that everyone can face everyone else, and work through one of these perennial classics to understand what the story is doing, what the philosophical argument is, what we're to take from the history of Thucydides, or Thucydides if you prefer. This is the kind of distinction that I have to be careful of, because my audience, these, as you said, right?
Yep.
McCaleb's going to catch me on that, right?
She probably will.
She will. The reading of these books together with their classmates, with their peers, and obviously a teacher as guide is paramount. It's foremost in the work that we do, chiefly because we believe that a seminar where a text, a durable, perennial favorite, has something to say to every generation. And so we're going to be reading those together. I think that Humane Letters course is by far the most distinctive and obvious feature of a Great Hearts Academy, but I cannot overemphasize the fact that all of the other things, so again, a typical school day for a prep school student, we also have grammar schools, a prep school student is going to study not only Humane Letters, mathematics, the sciences, the arts, which includes poetry and drama and music and fine arts. Again, I double emphasize the fact that our students learn the techniques to produce brilliant reproductions. I mean, really brilliant reproductions of masterworks. So when I go and I see a Dürer or a Dürer reproduction on the wall in one of our schools, I'm just struck, I'm stunned by the fact that ordinary run-of-the-mill kids like my own can produce that stuff. And they do it consistently. Why? And I think the art class is particularly worth highlighting because it's a metaphor. That's the English teacher in me. It's an analogy for what we're doing across the curriculum, which is teaching an attentiveness and a care and a set of skills that will provide every student the ability to make, whether with words, right, as they express their thoughts in writing or in speech, or whether with paint or chalk or charcoal, or with their voices as they sing or play the recorder, and that's a heck of a treat, I say, with
Parent sacrificial love.
Yeah,
right
that's
there.
right. But learning to make music, learning to speak carefully, persuasively, thoughtfully, right? Learning to engage. I think this is crucial. Those HL, those Humane Letters conversations are rich in part because students are learning to navigate differences, to see the different ideas and maybe even the clash of positions is a good thing, because I'm going to be learning something if I listen carefully to what my peer has to say. Never mind what my teacher has to say, but my peer is going to check me, is going to challenge me. And I'm going to have to learn the art of argument, which is all but lost, right? I mean, we do a lot of arguing, but mostly we do shouting.
Sure.
We shout at one another today, right? These young people are required by dint of the form and the structure of that class to learn how to present arguments civilly and to learn to respect and treat with respect those with whom you differ or you even oppose outright.
It's one of my favorite parts about a really good debate round between good students, to watch them both go toe-to-toe. They each have their arguments, they have their evidence, and then they get to rebuttal, and they shred each other's arguments with vigor and fire. And then the round is over, and it's like it's just like watching two excellent athletes who are done, and they just shake hands, and that was the game, and they walk out better friends because of their disagreement than if they had just shaken hands. And there's really something beautiful there.
That's right.
Now, so much of what you're describing fits really well with a classical point of view. Well, let me ask you one last question. We're going to wrap this up. I know
Sure.
we're getting long for this episode. I recently read two different articles. One by Luis Marcos from Houston Baptist University. He had a piece in Christianity Today about classical education. And then Christopher Perrin of Classical Academic Press wrote a follow-up, a response piece about agreeing with everything Marco said in the article, but disagreeing with the title.
Okay.
By the time they were both done, they both talked about classical education as a renewal movement. Would you see Great Hearts Academy as participating in that renewal movement and being kind of all about classical education, or would you disagree with that as kind of a moniker?
No, I would heartily embrace that Great Hearts Academies is a part of the renewal within a very specific sector, namely classical charters, right? Whereas, as an example, Thales is a private model, or some of the schools that Chris Perrin is working with are religious private schools with a classical identity. Great Hearts happens to be leading the way in classical charters, and is hopeful to see more of them. There may be about 220 by my count today, classical charters. We want to provide leadership there because there's no umbrella organization, no particular connection to one another until 18 months ago when we put forward this Institute for Classical Education, and then decided last year to open up work we had been doing internally for our own teachers, namely the kind of professional development where we bring scholars to speak to the subject matter that we teach to teenagers or even to grammar school students. We wanted to deepen the adult understanding of the subject matter being taught, right? As adults, to think about anything from Lewis Carroll, right, to Aristotle. We brought in scholars to help our teachers as adults go deeper in the material, in the texts, in the ideas that are present. We did it and had a great time at it, and our teachers loved it, and then we opened it up to other charters and privates, by the way. Chris was present at the symposium. I'm trying to get Louis down as well. Down. I think we're going to have quite a showing this coming spring, March 2, 3, and 4, 2020 in Phoenix. Will be our second annual of this open forum, right? We've done it internally before this, but I'm really excited because we had 400 people, more than 400 people at last year's event. We're hoping it'll be 5 or more hundred this year. And we're there, again, to support through scholarship, through research, through the dissemination of publications that highlight the really good things that are happening in the, and I will embrace the term, renewal of classical education.
Well, Dr. Jackson, thank you so much for lending us your expertise on charter schools and speaking also to the subsection within that of classical charter education. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to this episode of What's the Res? We hope that you've enjoyed, and in the event that there ends up being a Lincoln Douglas resolution on charter schools, hopefully you find Dr. Jackson's information helpful. We'll be sure to link to the Great Hearts website on the notes for this episode. And in the meantime, if you want to you can follow us on all of our social media pages. We're on Twitter, Reddit, and Instagram with the hashtag @whatstheres_. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/whatstheres. You could email us at whatstheres@gmail.com. And just in case that you're like me and can't get enough debate in your life, you want to check out our premium debates. You can find those at whatstheres.podbean.com/premium, where you can find our recorded stream of debates, and you can access those for $3 a month or for $30 a year. Thank you for your support of our work here at What's the Res, and until next time, work hard, speak well, and seek truth.